Election Matters presents the top 10 most interesting findings of 2011. I'm Frank Newport, Gallup editor-in-chief.
I'm Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today.
And this is Election Matters. Well, Susan, we're here at the end of the year. Everybody else does their top 10 lists, so we're doing it too. Everything we've looked at, polling data related to the election one way or the other. Here are 10 of the most interesting findings of the year. Number 10, the American public defies conventional wisdom when it comes to inequality and Occupy Wall Street. A lot of our data, Susan, particularly near the end of the year, show that Americans weren't even aware of Occupy Wall Street with all the discussion about it, didn't know what it was, didn't have an opinion. And also when it came to inequality, the new populist tone taken by President Obama, a lot of our data showed that the American public not all that concerned about it, much more concerned about growing the economy than they are about reducing the gap between the rich and the poor.
Well, here's number 9, another example where polling is smarter than pundits. Because for weeks and weeks here, you talked about the strength of Herman Cain's positive intensity rating, that measurement of how strongly Republicans feel about him. And I was saying, pundits know that he's not going to go anywhere. Well, you turned out to be right. He turned out to take the lead in the Republican field until other factors brought it back down.
Most interesting finding number 8, a growing support for what we might call freedom of expression, freedom of behavior, or libertarianism. 3 different measures we tracked this year where Americans became more, I guess we could say, libertarian. 1 was support for same-sex marriage. 2 was the legalized use of marijuana. And 3 was a downtick in support for legalized gun control, in particular for banning the possession of handguns. That hit a historic low.
Interesting, because 1's a conservative cause on against gun control. 2 are kind of liberal causes for same-sex marriage and legalization of marijuana. Complicating, I think, for both the parties. Number 7, the stability in President Obama's job approval rating. It's really been remarkable. We're used to things going up and down in polling. Not so much with President Obama's approval rating. It sticks in the low 40s. It got only up to 51 after Osama bin Laden was assassinated, a real high point for him this year. Didn't go that low, didn't go that high, and does not at the moment seem high enough to assure his reelection, judging by historical standards.
Absolutely. His strategists would want it to go higher, not stay so stable where it is. All right, most interesting finding number 6, the remarkable stability in the positioning of Republican candidate Mitt Romney. This is truly remarkable because we've seen so much up and down in the support for the other GOP candidates all year long, and yet Mitt Romney just goes steady as she goes, between 20 and 25% of Republicans, poll after poll after poll, even as everybody else is going up and down around him. It's just remarkable. But like we said for Obama, his strategists, that is Romney's, would prefer it get higher, up into the 30 and 40%, but at the moment it's stable, but right there between 20 and 25%.
Here's our number 5 most interesting poll finding of the year, and that is how negative Americans feel toward their government. How are you being governed? A historic low on that question that Gallup has asked. When we ask about job approval for Congress, that hits a new low. Only 11% of Americans say Congress is doing a good job. That's never been as low as that in the history of the country. Really, when it comes to all aspects of life in Washington, Americans don't like what they see here. And
that leads to the most interesting finding of the year, number 4, which is the most unpopular thing that Washington did all year. And we could say jokingly, that is convene Congress. But I would say, looking at our data, the most unpopular thing that Congress in particular did was to bicker and not compromise, because all of our data show that Americans want ideological partisan positions set aside. They want their elected representatives to compromise and find a solution. Time after time, we've had Congress bickering and not doing just that, and that, of course, is what leads to these horrible, horrible ratings that the American public is giving their elected representatives here in Washington. Now, the number 3 most interesting poll finding of the year was what Washington did that people liked. And the one thing that happened this year that got the broadest approval from the American public was the assassination of Osama bin Laden. Not surprisingly, almost 9 out of 10 Americans thought that was a good thing to do. Mm-hmm. And also, we could say half jokingly, another popular thing that Congress did was to go home, right, and not convene here in Washington. Actually, Rick Perry's picked that up as a theme, of course. He wants half-time Congress here. All right, Susan, that's number 2 in our list of most interesting things that happened this year is the American public's remarkable ability to stay personally pretty happy. All this stuff is going on around them, and we, of course, report on how negative they are about Congress and very, very low satisfaction with the way things are going out there across the country. But when we say, hey, how satisfied are you with your personal life? We have a remarkably high percentage of Americans who say, I'm satisfied with the way things are going. We say, how's your standard of living? Americans are pretty satisfied. And some other measures of economics, Americans say, yeah, I'm doing all right. So despite all the turmoil in the outside world, the good news is that a lot of Americans are getting along just fine in their personal lives. Thank you very much.
You know, Frank, we agreed on what was the #1 most interesting finding in polling this year, and that was what we might call the curse of the rainbow, in that we started the year with this big Republican field, and we have seen one Republican candidate after another have a big arc up in support and then collapse. We saw it with Rick Perry, we saw it with Herman Cain, and we're in the process of seeing it now with Newt Gingrich.
Yeah, and we were amazed at the degree to which when we floated Donald Trump's name out there, we would see at least temporarily, bingo, there'd be a big jump for him as well. It's really remarkable. It suggests that Republicans are really looking for Mr. or Ms. Right for their candidate, but the degree to which they've fallen shows certainly they've not fallen in love with any of the candidates so far. And that's what makes it so interesting in the coming year to see what happens.
And in fact, in the coming week, we'll see voters begin to cast ballots in Iowa to choose which of these candidates they want to see face President Obama.
We've talked about a lot of fascinating data here in our top 10 most interesting findings, but if you want to know more, go to Gallup.com. We've got all the details and all of the data right there on each one of these 10 facts we've talked about. And Susan, I look forward to finding the top 10 most interesting findings of 2012 as the new year begins.
And a Happy New Year to you, Frank.
Happy New Year to you, Susan. I'm Frank Newport, Gallup Editor-in-Chief.
I'm Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief for USA Today.
And this is Election Matters.